You know, if only we had a time machine to go back in time and fix all the legal wranglings of the 80s so that Miss Pac-Man would still be a thing today. I'm still a little miffed about that, you know. So the last time we saw Pac-Man around these parts, he was taking the night off and letting his inept stunt double do all the work. But now it's time for some action in the form of Namco's 1994 pack offering Pac-In-Time, released for Super Nintendo and other platforms, and also currently available on the Pac-Man Museum Plus compilation available on Switch, Steam, and other platforms. But we're playing the SNES release since it's in English, and also it has Miss Pac-Man, or Mrs. Pac-Man, whereas the Museum Plus version has the Super Famicom version, and also has whoever this is supposed to be.
Hey, that's not Miss Pac-Man. This game sucks. Yeah, we're not playing this. Fuck that.
Pac-In-Time takes the form of a side-scrolling platformer with the premise that sees our hero thrown back in time by the evil ghost witch, and now he has to find the portal that can bring him back home. To do this, he must venture through 5 worlds spanning 50 plus stages, and within each stage, he must collect all the pellets scattered throughout the level in order to unlock the exit and move on to the next stage where he can do the whole thing all over again. Old school, familiar Pac-Man trope, except now it's side-scrolling platforming bits and Pac-Man isn't always equipped to tackle these, but he can come across 4 basic items that can help him out. A grappling line that lets him swing across ceilings, walls, and basically propel him to higher ground with proper use. A basic fireball projectile for long-range attacks as well as burning some passages clear. An air bubble to swim underwater. And a hammer to smash through wooden platforms. You can enable these abilities by finding the appropriately colored ring and jumping through one, but jumping through the same ring in its blackened state will disable the ability, which is something you could do if you want, but I don't know. So Pac-In-Time has this weird thing where each stage starts you off with some abilities and the rest you have to seek out, and it's never the same set. Sometimes you'll start with a rope, sometimes you'll start with a fireball, or any combination, or possibly even all of them. It's usually dependent on what's immediately needed, which I suppose is a good thing because you start with what you need to move around and out of a thing or something. I'm not fond of the rings. Regular pickups would have been sufficient for this sort of thing, but whatever. Speaking of which, there are power pellets scattered about, which turn ghosts blue and allows you to eat them, but does nothing against the non-ghost enemies. That's where fireballs and hammers come into play. You can also collect fruit to restore some health. Yes, Pac-Man has a health meter, and if it runs out, he loses a life. It respawns at the start point, but fortunately you don't have to start from scratch with the pellets, just power-ups whenever you lose a life. Now when it's game over, that's another story, but we'll get to that. So it's a decidedly simple and straightforward premise that works well enough, for the short term at least, then it starts to fall apart. To be fair, most of the difficulty comes from the handling of the grappling line as well as handling some of Pac-Man's slippery feel. Pac-Man doesn't quite have the best traction, and even his jumping takes a bit of getting used to. Holding down the B button will cause Pac-Man to bounce off the ground repeatedly, which helps in gaining a little height eventually, but also makes him a little tough to handle, especially when he's stuck at walls and shit. Likewise, the grappling line, or rope, whatever you want to call it, while key to your navigating these massive levels, also takes a learning to use effectively, sometimes being somewhat difficult to aim properly, and sometimes the levels are laid out in such a way that's too inconvenient for the line to be used effectively. There are other issues that pop up here and there. Naturally, this being a collectathon of sorts, there eventually comes a point where you've seemingly explored every nook and cranny of a level and seemingly collected every possible pellet, only to find that you may have missed one or two along the way. You have a counter letting you know how many you have left. so there's going to be a bit of backtracking involved if this happens, and some of the levels can seem a bit massive for their own good, or perhaps too clever, as some employ warps that take you to different parts of the map or require you to uncover some hidden paths to access more level. Now the good news is that there's no time limit. You're not pressed for time on these levels, you could explore at your leisure. But when exploration becomes a necessity rather than something to sate curiosity for an extra bonus or something, that can be a bit of a problem. And the fact that you have 50 plus levels of this without so much as a boss fight or anything else of the sort every so often to break up the tedium, something like this may be fine with old school Pac-Man where the concept was nice and simple, but in this case, sometimes you need a little something more to break up the monotony. Yeah, so it's unfortunate that Pac-In-Time feels a bit half-baked because I actually do like the general idea of the game, collecting all the pellets in a stage to unlock the next one, giving the player tools to navigate these stages, possibly find some hidden stuff like keys for chests and doors. There's a good concept in there that I wish they spent more time developing. Perhaps employing a map or radar system to help guide you to your next set of pellets, tightening up the controls a bit, or cleaning up some bits and pieces so it's less of a slog. The game eventually culminates in a boss battle at the end of it all, and every 5th level cleared you're rewarded with a fairly simple password to resume your progress at a later time, each new start giving you 3 lives and 3 continue credits, so you've got some wiggle room. There's also an option to slow down the game speed, and it really doesn't help much. Pac-In-Time adopts a less cartoony aesthetic compared to the new adventures. Well, the cutscenes are close enough I guess, but it's nonetheless a rather charming little game visually. Little Pac-Man looks so cute and animates well enough. The various other antagonistic critters are also somewhat cute looking, if not unremarkable. And the scenery is rather nice looking. I did encounter occasional bits of slowdown at times, but I'd consider these anomalous at best and wouldn't worry too much. But no, Pac-In-Time is a perfectly fine looking game that I wish played as well as it looked. Likewise, you have a rather pleasant sounding soundtrack to complement the game's charming visuals. Low on the cutesy voice drops, I think there's like 1 or 2 vocal bits at most. And then you have some random sound effects and some interesting takes on classic sounds, but the music is quite nice. Some familiar Pac motifs can be heard and expanded upon. You've got one tune for each of the 5 worlds, which is certainly a choice considering the gameplay aspect of things, but none of them are too overly tiresome and most are quite pleasant. Overall, I have mixed feelings about Pac-In-Time. On the one hand, it is almost a perfect counterpoint for those who didn't care for the new adventures approach and would rather play a Pac-Man game that's more like a traditional video game format and not some experimental interactive cartoon. But on the other hand, that doesn't necessarily make it a great game or even a good one either. The rare bits of slowdown, the slippery controls, the obtuse placement of pellets, and some other minor hiccups hinder what could have been a semi-decent side-scroller, but instead turned out to be a fascinating yet flawed experiment to go beyond the usual Pac boundaries, something that Namco would eventually achieve with greater success via the Pac-Man World line, which we'll get into in about a decade or so. Still, I wouldn't go so far as to call Pac-In-Time unplayable, as those who can put up with some of the issues can find traces of a decent game in there, but I'd imagine the more likely case would be play a couple levels, get frustrated, give up, and move on to something else. That said, it's on Pac-Man Museum Plus if you want to check it out, and who knows, maybe you'll enjoy it, maybe you won't. All I know is that the next time we touch Pac-Man this year on this web zone, it'll hopefully be on Atari 7800 sooner than later.